Welcome back, and for you vintage computer enthusiasts, I have a special treat for you today. We're going to start off with a wordy, lengthy story that nobody wants to hear, but I'm going to tell you anyway. So, part of my job, I have to dispose of vintage technology. Stuff that we no longer use, it's obsolete, it doesn't work, parts, full systems, peripherals, you name it. That is part of my job. It's an unfortunate part, but it has to be done. Generally, I have a company actually come to my place of employment who hauls everything away free of charge. I had just gotten rid of a bunch of basically junk, and then I got a call. I had to visit one of our kitchens, and the printer that they use to print out transaction records had finally died. It was a 1999 HP LaserJet 4000, one that I had planned on retiring a year prior, but it still worked, so we kept using it. 18-year-old printer, still kicking. Anyway, so I went there, I swapped the printer out, I loaded the old one into my car, and I didn't want to have it sitting around my office until I wait for the next e-waste pickup, so I brought it to the local town dump. Now, the town dump, or transfer station, is a place where people bring their household refuse, recyclables, electronics, building supplies, anything that they don't want, and it gets trucked away by various companies for various dispositions. In the case of electronics, it's recycled by an e-waste company, similar to the one that picks up my stuff at work. So, I'm pulling into the electronics area to get rid of my printer. And right in front of my car is a large pallet covered, or just stacked high, with CRT television sets, shrink-wrapped, awaiting pickup that day. In fact, I believe the truck was probably about half an hour away from picking it up. On top of that pallet, I noticed something. It caught my eye. It was an object that I had been looking for at least a couple of years. I've been looking for this particular device because it really holds a lot of nostalgic value to me. And I know my viewers, that's you guys, would love to see something like this because you love this stuff. I've noticed my viewership has actually gone up recently as I've started posting more things like this. So I saw it and I knew I had to have it, but there was a problem. See, years ago, when I used to dispose of e-waste at this location on a regular basis, I used to come home with things all the time. In fact, they encouraged it because the more I took, the less they had to pay to dispose of. It was win-win. I got stuff to build a channel out of and build a following with, and they got rid of stuff that they didn't have to pay for. But in recent years, they've really started nailing that down. They don't want people picking stuff out of there because it's become a bit of a problem. People have been taking stuff and disposing of it illegally, and it's just not a good vision for the town. There was an attendant standing there, and I asked him nicely. I said, "Sir, can I have the object on top of that pallet?" And he says, "No, the pallet is shrink-wrapped and you can't have it." I then said, "Well, you know, sir, with all due respect, I really need that thing, and it would really be a shame to see it get crushed in about half an hour. I need it. I desperately want it." And he said, and then I said, "You know what I'll do? I will if I have to disturb any shrink wrapping, I will replace it for you. I will fix it. I will make it better. It'll be good." And he says, "You know, you seem like a really nice guy. And I bet your YouTube viewers would love to see this get saved because that's what it's all about, man." And I said, "Right on, right on, right on." So he said, "I'll tell you what. I'll turn my back. And if it's not there when I turn back around, it's yours." And I said, "Okay. Hey, look over there." And there I was, reaching up at the top of this pallet. It was taller than me, but I didn't care. I would have climbed Mount Everest for this thing. And wait till you see what I found. Are we ready? Is the intensity building up? I'm going to deliberately not title this video so that you guys don't know what you're going to see until you watch it. It's called clickbait, and it works. Check out Casey Neistat's channel. It works great. Here we go. The object that was on top of that pallet was a mint condition, fully functional, clean, immaculate LC575, also known as the Performa 575. Okay. If you're let down by now, I am sorry. I'm so sorry. If this lets you down and you're like, I wanted to see a Lisa or a Macintosh XL or an Apple III, yeah, I'm sorry. We have here is what was once a plain Jane ordinary Performa 575. This is the machine that defined accessible multimedia computing of the 1990s. This is the machine that Apple released to replace the aging Color Classic and Classic series and the modular but lovable Performa 400, or I'm sorry, the Performa 400, which was also known as the LC2. This was the all-in-one replacement for the Mac Classic, essentially. This machine was fairly affordable, well built like a rock, like a tank. Reasonably priced, very functional, fully packed, all-in-one desktop computer. Apple sold bazillions of these things to mostly schools, college level, K-12 education, that kind of thing. And they were sold to the educational sector as the LC 500 series. They had the 520, there was a whole bazillion different lists of models. And the consumers got the Performa 500 series. The model numbers line up almost exactly. So a Performa 575 is an LC 575 in most cases. That's pretty much how it worked out. These machines were, again, they were fairly decent for their time. This one here features a 680/40. Of course, I'm skipping over a bunch of numbers there. It's a classic Motorola 68K system, not a PowerPC, running at 33 megahertz. The factory configuration was 5 megabytes of RAM, a 2X Mitsumi CD-ROM drive tray loader, which was a big deal back then because earlier drives used caddies. In fact, I've seen one of these before that had a caddy load drive in it. I'm not sure if it was factory or not. It featured a 1.44 meg auto inject, or I'm sorry, it was a manual inject auto eject floppy drive made by Sony. This one has the factory 250 megabyte Connor Peripherals SCSI hard drive, and yes, it has a SCSI bus on the CD drive as well. This machine features no add-ons. It does not have the AV tuner or anything crazy like that. No network interface. It is in its factory state. It features a 14-inch Sony Trinitron color display. Beautiful display. Built-in stereo speakers. It has a headphone jack in the front, which is extremely handy. It has a front control panel with a volume and brightness control. If we spin it around in the back, you'll see a couple of things that you wouldn't normally expect to see on an Apple all-in-one. By the way, the casing on this computer is in absolutely perfect condition. There is not one blemish, not one scratch, no markings anywhere. In all full disclosure, I did clean it up a little bit and I applied some Mother's Protectant. It's kind of like a dressing for plastics. It works really well. Brings back that factory shine. I did apply that. It also features a rearward 50-pin SCSI port. I'm sorry, 25-pin SCSI port. Of course, you've got your serial and 2 serial ports. So one for communications, one for printer, and of course an ADV port. And you've got your rear microphone and stereo speakers out. Now, over here are some adjustments that go straight into the analog board, and that's to allow you to adjust the screen alignment without disassembling the entire machine. In fact, I'm going to make a few fine-tune adjustments to that as well. The screen is just a bit, just a hair off center. Let's take the rear cover off. Now, in all, again, full disclosure, I've already taken this machine, most of it apart, at least the lower chassis. And I've cleaned with compressed air the entire lower chassis. I have replaced the CMOS battery with a homemade version. I'll let you see that in just a minute. Let's take the rear cover off. And I'm going to show you how easy it is to upgrade this machine, which is a vast difference from, a drastic difference, sorry, from the original classic line, or the compact Mac line. This door had a broken latch, but fortunately it had broken inward, so I was able to recover and reattach it. I'll show you how I did that. So here's the rear door. These are currently selling on eBay for about $75 a piece. I can't believe anyone's paying that, but they are. And this is the latch that had snapped off. It's very common on these, and it's almost guaranteed to happen. But what I did is to reduce the structural tension on this thing, I sanded down this little bump out, which is what locks it into the shell, and I reattached it with my favorite super glue, this Loctite Gel Ultra Control stuff. Ultra Gel, that's right. This stuff is amazing. It's strong. It bonds ABS plastic like no glue I've ever used before. But it's just there really for show at this point. This latch still works, and of course it's secured in by 2 screws. The hard drive, like I said, is it's a SCSI Connor Peripherals 250 meg drive, and we're going to pull it out very gently. It's held in. Now this is, again, Apple really did an about face when it came to making upgradability an option on their machines. To upgrade the hard drive, you just simply squeeze and pull it back like that. It's a bit tricky because there's nothing to grab onto, but I've had it out a few times. There we go. Yeah, it's getting there. Almost there. There we go. So here's the original hard drive. Now any ordinary 50-pin SCSI drive will fit in here. I've got a 1 gigabyte upstairs I'd like to try on it at some point. This sled can be transferred to any drive. You've got these interface adapters. You got your power here and your SCSI here. I mean, really, this is a design technique that was later applied to laptops starting about 15 to 20 years ago. To remove the motherboard, simply grab and pull, just like that. Now this board is interchangeable with other Apple models. As a matter of fact, I had an LC575, or it might have been a Performa, that was given to me by my aunt many years ago, at least 15 years ago. And I decided to pop a Performa, it was a 6300 CD motherboard into it. And I did. I successfully got a Performa 6300 motherboard to fit in the chassis. I had to modify the wiring harness, but I got it working. It actually worked. I never finished it. I had some issues with video quality, and it was a modification that was pretty common back in the day, where you could actually build yourself a 6300 all-in-one using an old LC575 chassis. Pretty cool. So here's the main board. You've got your Motorola 68LC040. Did I say 30? I meant 40. Anyway, 60, 30, 40, same thing. So here's the processor. This is the CMOS battery. This I built myself. What I did, basically, is I strapped 3 alkaline AAA batteries together. And, of course, setting or connecting the terminals as needed, as correctly done. I added 2 cardboard end caps, one on each side, and then I repurposed the original connector from the old battery. And I did a video on how to do this, but I decided not to upload it for many reasons. Now, one problem that is very common on these boards is the capacitors. These silver cans here, they tend to leak out and eventually the machine will cease to function. They're very easy to replace. I suggest if you have one of these, you should do that anyway. These have begun leaking. I'm surprised the machine works at all at this point. But that is going to have to be done very soon. We've got our 72-pin RAM slot here. This is our video RAM. These are not quite fully 72-pin style compatible, but that's what these are for. Video RAM. This is not the original memory chip, memory stick. This originally had 5 megabytes of onboard RAM, and I'm sorry, of total RAM. There was 4 onboard, and there was a 1 megabyte 72-pin SIM in this slot. This is an 8 megabyte SIM, giving us a total of 12. I found this in my parts bin just yesterday. Okay. Now, it does have some internal expansion capabilities. We have a PDS slot, and I believe a NuBus slot here. Although we got to brush up with the terminology in these old Macs. I forget which one is which, but anyway. Okay, going back to everymac.com. Let's take a look at what we have for expansion. Now, one other thing is you can replace this processor with a PowerPC upgrade chip. I believe the PowerPC 601 is the processor that you need to bring it up to that spec if you want to. Maximum RAM supported, according to every Mac, is 36 megabytes. And what do we have here? It has 1 megabyte maximum of VRAM, but its standard equipment is 512K, which is, I believe, what we have here. The resolution is 640 by 480. Okay, so what we have for expansion slots would be this one right here. This is a PDS slot, the processor direct slot. The other one is a COM slot, which is meant for, actually, I think I have them reversed. This is our COM slot. This is our PDS slot. Now this slot is really meant for modems and network adapters, whereas the other one can be used for a variety of different accessories. So let's go ahead and slide the motherboard back in the tray, just like that. You'll notice, by the way, that it also has one of these built-in interconnect boards. Now this is soldered to the board. It cannot be removed without solder, of course. All right. Just slide right in like that. Okay. And we're going to take our hard drive and put it back in. I'm not going to take the front door off because there are some very fragile clips and I really would rather not manipulate them unless I have to. Like I said, I could have upgraded the hard drive on this. I have a 1 gig sitting upstairs that would fit in here, but this drive actually sounds very healthy. So I'm going to leave it alone. I'm going to leave well enough alone and just enjoy what it has. And we're going to now go ahead and fire it up and take a look at some other stuff that it has. Now, before we get to that, I will tell you that it had its factory original system load. Original operating system, which was Mac OS 7.1 P6, which was, I believe, the Performa version of Mac OS 7.1, which had some consumer-oriented software built in and extensions as well. It still has all of that original software, but I've upgraded it to Mac OS 7.6.1, which makes it behave more like the LC 500s that I remember growing up with as a kid. So my two favorite versions were 7.5 and 7.6 because they had a lot more features, a lot more customizability, better memory management, better everything. It was just a better OS, much cleaner, much more. No, it wasn't cleaner, but it just had more features, and there's more technical reasons why it's better. But yeah, The only downfall with running that kind of an OS on this machine is that it does get taxed with its original 5 megs of RAM, so upgrading it beyond that is required. That's why I did the memory expansion. So let's go ahead and put it back on the desk over there. We'll take a look and see how good the display is, because when you see how bright and crystal clear it is, you'll be surprised. That a machine that was headed for the trash, getting ready to be ground into bits, is in such good condition. Now, before we do that, let's talk about value. Now, these machines are getting fairly collectible. These earlier multimedia all-in-ones, especially these Macs here, even PCs, they've reached a point where the people who were children back in the day, growing up learning how to use computers, and they were learning on these tanks, they're starting to buy them up, and sometimes at astronomical prices. I went on eBay to see what this model is selling for, and I got one I saw one that had sold for $200, which surprised me because not 5 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, you could not give them away. But they've gotten to a point where the remaining units are now collector's items. I'm not sure how many are left out there in the wild, but I imagine there's quite a few, because they did make a lot of them. Some of the more collectible models, of course, would be the Color Classic, which has been a collector's item for quite some time. The earliest black and white all-in-one models, the old, for example, the 128, of course, the first Mac, and even the 512, those are two fairly steady mainstays. The modular ones aren't as collectible. The modular being the separate monitor, separate system unit. So the Performa 630, the 6300, etc., and some of the other Power Macs, Power PCs. They're not as collectible, but they are collectible, no less. But these all-in-ones seem to sell for a lot more than those do. And I believe it's because of their design. I mean, they are a stunning example of Apple's design process in the as it stood in the early to mid 90s. Very. I'm not really sure how to put it in words. I just love the case design on this thing. It's so modern. It's so modern for the 90s. I think it looks good even today. Of course, the new iMacs are they all look the same. You know, there's not really much differentiation between them. You've seen one, you've seen them all. But these all-in-one CRT-based Macs, each model had something different going for it, or each product line. You know, so let's go ahead and let's just fire it up, and we'll talk more. Now you'll notice I have it paired with an image writer 2. And some of you historians may be wondering if that is historically accurate. Yes, I went there. When you display a vintage computer, you want to make sure that it's displayed with peripherals that would have been available at the time of its purchase. In this case, it is historically accurate. The ImageWriter 2 was discontinued in 1996. This Performa 575 was discontinued. You're going to make me look it up, aren't you? I believe it was available from early 1994 to about 1996. Late 95, early 96. And, of course, again, as such, the ImageWriter is appropriate for this machine. Even though my ImageWriter was manufactured, I believe, in 1989 or 90, they didn't really change the styling of the ImageWriter or any of the mechanical functions until, well, yeah, they did make some subtle changes to the door switch and a few other modifications, and I think they switched from a linear power supply to a switching power supply, which made the printer weigh less. But that's not something that the casual observer is going to notice, and I'm not going to really fuss over that. Now, as for the keyboard, you'll notice that is a Snow White keyboard from a 2GS. That happens to be the keyboard from my 2GS. And no, that is not correct. I do, however, have the proper Apple design keyboard on order. Cost me $30. I was lucky to find one, as a matter of fact, because some of them are going for stupid money. So I found one for $30 in good condition. The mouse, however, is correct. This is the teardrop mouse that was available with this machine from the factory. So let's fire it up. Now, if you do not have an ADB keyboard, there is no way that I am aware of to fire one up just for testing purposes. So when I brought this thing to my office initially, I had no way of testing it. I did plug it in, and I heard a slight dink sound as the analog circuitry energized. Remember, this has soft power, so that is always on, as long as the rocker switch in the back is turned on. So once you hit the soft power switch, boom, there you go. So let's take a look at this CRT. Now this is a Sony Trinitron 14-inch CRT. Now you can tell if it's a Trinitron just by glancing at it. It's pretty obvious. Trinitron displays, and I've seen some clones that have been very similar. They have the vertical plane is absolutely flat. There's no curve from here to here, here to here, or here to here. They're perfectly flat, at least to the naked eye. They do have a gentle horizontal curve, but it's not a very drastic one. And they're always going to have one or two visible horizontal lines that appear to be defects at first, but they're not. There's one here, and usually they have one coming from the bottom, but the 14-inch tube may only have the one. Most of the larger ones, actually, is that one? No, just the one line. 17 inches definitely have two, and I believe the 15s as well. And couple of the things you want to look for in a CRT, if you're trying to determine whether it's worth saving or not, you want to look especially around the edges. Now, when they start to go, it's usually more noticeable around the edges. You'll have what's called pin cushioning. Now this can be, on more modern monitors, this can be compensated for the most part, electrically. But pin cushioning is when the sides of the display begin to cave in. Now all of these problems are caused by aging and drifting values of passive components like resistors and capacitors. Not to mention, some issues can be caused by a failing CRT tube as well. But definitely driver circuitry is usually what causes the pin cushioning. That would be the passive components and the display's driver. The focusing issues, I'm not really sure. There's not always one particular cause. There can be multiple causes, but you want to look for focusing. If you look at the image and it looks crystal clear, and then you're probably not going to have a problem. Now the focusing on the outer edges and the center are equal, which is a good sign. That means that there aren't any alignment problems with the electron guns. On a color display, electron guns that begin to become out of alignment, usually because either driver circuitry failure or by the little ring magnets on the end of the CRT neck are starting to lose their magnetism. That can cause an issue where the colors begin to bleed. And I believe on a black and white monitor it can cause fuzziness. But if you start seeing color bleeding, like look at this Apple logo, it should look like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 distinct colors. If it bleeds and it looks like kind of like a mishmash of colors, then that's a good indicator on a Mac as to the condition of the CRT. This looks like a crystal clear apple, like it's supposed to. Usually color bleeding can be first noticed in a horizontal or vertical line, and you'll see that this black line is a black line. If the black line looks like it has some color fuzziness on the edges of it, well then you've got, CRT may not be failing, but it's not a spring chicken anymore. It is focused. Now, is it bright? Now, if you bring the brightness up all the way, you want to look for something called scan lines, where there are, now this is usually going to happen on older CRTs, earlier VGAs and such, even something this old, but you'll see scan lines. They'll be like diagonal lines that start to appear. That's a bad sign. I'm not going to get into how to repair your CRT because I don't cover that in my channel, but because I'm not familiar with it myself. I can just tell you what to watch out for. And now this one doesn't have any scan lines. It maintains focus on full brightness. Actually, it is a little off. It is a little off. I will tell you that. This could probably be compensated for with a fine-tuned adjustment on the back of the flyback. And there is an adjustment for this. You could probably tweak it just a little bit to compensate for the age and drifting values. But as I bring the value of the brightness down, it gets better. And the other thing you want to look for is burn-in, and this is something that usually happens to CRTs, on computers especially, where you want to look for any static images that won't go away. Now it'll be more evident on a solid color background, and usually you're going to find burn-in in areas where user interface elements never change. For example, right over here, if I move the Macintosh HD icon over, and this one here, do I still see them here? I don't. So that's a good sign. There is no burn-in here, which is usually where it happens. Also the trash can. It won't let me move it. But anyway, also menu bars. And these will be more apparent when you shut the machine off and you take a bright light and put it right up to the display. If you still see menu bars, then you've got burn-in. And you don't even have to turn the computer on for that. So, now burn-in does not mean the display is dying. It just means it has images burned into it. If you can live with that, then you're fine. It does not mean it's failing at all. It's a problem that happens with CRTs and plasma televisions as well. It's just an annoyance rather than a functional issue. And that is, I'm going to give this CRT a pretty high grade. I'm going to give it an A or an A minus because it does have a little bit of, it does go out of focus when you bring the brightness up to its max. But not by much, not by enough to cause any alarm. It is 23 years old after all, so these things happen. But it's one of the best early CRTs that I've come across in recent years. I don't usually see them in this good condition anymore. And while we're harping on condition, I mean, this case is perfect. It has absolutely no blemishes of any kind. Remember, I did find this on top of a pallet. Now, if it had been placed below some of those, and the only reason it was on top is because it was the smallest item on the pallet. So whoever stacked the pallet put this one up on top because it was smaller than those big 27-inch and 30-some-odd inch CRT TVs that were on the bottom. Thank God, and the timing could not have been better. I am a collector, and I just happened to be there at the right time. And often, when people ask me a lot, you know, where do you get your vintage computers? And it's like, I don't go searching for them, they just sort of come to me. I can't put it any other way. They come to me. And yes, the original keyboard and mouse were gone, but that's not a problem. I was able to find replacement ones. Fortunately, I was able to find one at a reasonable price. There is one blemish, and that is right here. And this is obviously from when it was disposed of. And I'm going to nullify this a little bit with a magic eraser, and that's going to help blend it in just a little bit. That's the one defect that I found so far. All right. Okay, so in this video, in this part of the video, we're going to reload this Performa 575 with a fresh copy of Mac OS 753. And the way we're going to do that is with a CD. I'm going to just project it here. I'll show you what it looks like. This particular CD is an original copy of the restore disc for the Power Mac 5260. One thing that Apple once did back in the day, probably before, this is before the iMac was released, every OS CD and floppy that was released with a particular model would work with other models. So this PowerMac 5260 restore disk, which was made in 1995 or 96, will actually work on this Performa LC 500 series from 1994. So what we're going to do is we're going to just pop the disk in. If the drive is blank, and I've already erased it, it'll boot right off the disk. No input needed. Now, in contrast, the current, or the latest generation of Macintosh computers that have come with a restore CD were locked and limited to the particular model that it was released with. It had to be, I believe, the same model identifier. So it would work on other machines of the same model, but it wouldn't work on anything newer or older, or anything of the same age from a different product line. So you can't use a MacBook restore CD with an iMac of the same generation. It won't work. Apple did that for copy protection, and they didn't want people being able... See, this was back when they still charged for the OS upgrades. They didn't want people to use their neighbor's CD from the MacBook they just bought to upgrade their iMac to Mac OS 10.7 or so. So what we're doing here is we're starting it right from the restore CD. And I'm going to show you which options to select. You never want to just select the default options when rebuilding a Mac from its original or from a restore CD. Because the default options are way more bloated than you need. It doesn't automatically identify the machine type in most cases and install just that. It'll install software for a PowerBook, for example, if I use all the default settings. So it's coming up to a gray screen. This is very slow. Remember, we have a 2x CD-ROM drive, so this is going to take some time. I'm going to try to pause the video and cut out the unnecessary footage. Okay, now there's a bewildering list of options here. When we open up the CD, you'll see Install System Software, Install System 7.5 Update 2.0, Install Apple Video MPEG SW. That's a separate installer. Install the Macintosh tutorial, and if we scroll down, I believe there's a few more. Or we can go directly into the System Software Installer folder and pull it from there. In fact, there it is, System 751 installation. And then there's an installer. So it's quite confusing. But first, I want to show you the disk utilities that used to come with Mac OS. Now, there were a couple of different utilities available. There was I think it was the disk. Hold on a second. I'm in the wrong folder here. Here it is, utilities. We have drive setup, disk first aid, disk copy. Drive setup is actually for, now this is where the, I believe the Power Macintosh version of the installer and the older generation installer kind of split. The drive setup utility, is if I try to run it, you're going to find that it won't let me do it. Drive setup is actually for IDE drives. This is a SCSI machine, so it won't run. There was a separate one, I believe it was Drive Setup SC or something to that effect, where it was actually for SCSI drives. And that is not on this disk, apparently. But that's okay, because I can still format the drive if I go to Special, Erase Disk, and select Macintosh HD, or the internal drive. So that is always a, that's something I just realized wasn't even here. So what I'm going to do is actually run Install System Software here. And I believe this is going to install 751. Then there's the System 7.5 Update 2.0. This is where it gets quite confusing because that is, I believe, yes, this is 751, which I want 753. which is run as a separate installer. Are you confused yet? Now, if I'm not mistaken, if I run the install system 7.5 update 2.0 installer, it will install 7.5.3. It actually requires 7.5 to be previously installed. So let's do that. Let's run the so instead of building in the latest updates into the main OS install, they added it as a separate installer. Now, so let's do a custom install. Never do the easy install, because remember, we're running on a 250 megabyte hard drive. We don't want to waste space. Now, if I check everything off, boom, 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 look at what it does. It installs system software for this Mac, system software for any Mac. That's every system enabler available on the disk. And this is kind of redundant. Minimum install for any Mac that kind of doesn't do anything. Then there's international support, which installs, I believe, it also has a mind-boggling number of cool little international flags. You know what? I think I'll spare the space, and save the space, and just do the full system for this Mac only. Okay. Printing installs every driver the disk has on it. I only have an image writer, so I'm going to uncheck the main option and just select image writer. I'm also going to install LaserWriter 8, which is networkable printers, if I recall. And that's it. What is LaserWriter 8? This allows you to use the printer description files to configure your LaserWriter printer. Actually, we don't need that. I'm mixing that up with something else. Sorry, apologize. Networking software. We do not have a network card, but we do want file sharing because we can still share files over a serial port. So I'm going to leave that only checked off. Multimedia software. We want both QuickTime and CD-ROM player because we have a CD-ROM drive. Compatibility software. PC Exchange and Macintosh Easy Open. PC Exchange allows me to open files that were created on a Windows machine or a DOS machine. All the fonts I'm installing. Now, Apple menu items, I'm going to check those off. Now let's see what we don't need. Let's see. It's all, we need everything there. Now control panels, I'm going to put all the control panels on. And then I'm going to uncheck the ones I don't need. In this case, CPU Energy Saver is not compatible on this model, so I'm not going to bother with that one. Well, you know what, we'll put it on, and if it doesn't work, we'll take it off later. Desktop patterns, absolutely want those. It's like, here we go. Power Macintosh card. This was an expansion card you could add to your 68K Mac, certain models, and it would give it the full functionality of a Power PC. Think of, if you don't know what a Power PC is, around that same time, Intel released their Pentium series. So they went from the 486 to the Pentium processors. The Power PC was kind of Apple's way of marketing up a processor to compete with a Pentium. So there was a separate enabler for that. We don't need that. We don't need PowerBook, PowerBook Display, PowerBook Setup. We do not need trackpad, because we do not have a trackpad. But everything else we're going to keep, including sharing setup. Alright. That's pretty much it in a nutshell. Now, the entire operating system, as selected, takes up 14.8 megabytes. The entire operating system comes in at under 15 megabytes, as chosen. Alright, so we just completed installing macOS 7.5.3 update. So I'm going to take a look at some other stuff I might be able to install. Now this definitely used a little more drive space. We're up to 21 megabytes used total, which again, I have 21 megs, seriously. But we still have 234 megs of disk space left. Let's see what else we can put on there. Multimedia options for your Mac. What do we got? Multimedia Tour. Let's see, transition, special delivery 2.0 player. This is all stuff that I'm not really concerned about. Extras. Eric's Solitaire Sampler. Well, that's something you've got to have. We'll put that in there too. Newton Demo. Sign of the Times. Acrobat Reader. No, I don't care about that. CPU Energy Saver. I don't think that works on these old classic Macs, the old 68K ones anyway. Eric. Solid text-to-speech. Text-to-speech. Yeah, let's put that on there. That's fun to play with. Hello, I am a Macintosh. Let's see what we can do here. Do the easy install. Yeah, if you have a classic Mac, you gotta have text-to-speech. I don't care who you are. That stuff's funny. Real funny. Okay, so now we're gonna restart the machine and see how that goes. Now I have some upsetting news, unfortunately. I have a 1 gigabyte hard drive that came out of a Power Mac, SCSI, and it unfortunately doesn't work. I put it in here and it was non-functional. So that's unfortunate, but you know, when you collect vintage computers, you learn to live with disappointment. That's all I'm going to say about that. Here we are. So there's a couple of things I'm going to do from this point forward. I'm going to start loading it up with my Vintage Mac software. I have a banner that I actually have to make for work by Monday for a display cabinet that I maintain. So there's a couple of things that I've got to do in order to call this a done deal. But I won't be sharing it all with you guys. If anyone wants to see anything in particular, please let me know. I'd be more than happy to do so. Before we go, let's go ahead and set our desktop background. We'll take a look at what 753 offered for desktop backgrounds. Not sure if I covered this yet or not, but I have already upgraded this machine from its original 5 megabytes of RAM to a whopping 12. Good times. So we are running 753. We have 9.6 megabytes of unused RAM at this point in time. We're going to change our desktop pattern to something a little more entertaining. It's creating our preference file for the first time. So let's take a look through these options here. Some of these are quite fantasizing. Some of these are quite beautiful. Ooh, that was nice. My favorite one back in when I was in school using these was probably this one here. I like that one a lot. But I also like the circuit board one, which I think I might have already gone past. Yeah, I think I did. 753 is a good OS for a machine of this vintage. It gives you the look and feel of classic Mac OS without crossing into Mac OS 8 territory. It runs comfortably on these older 68K models. This will actually run on a Mac Classic 2, but it's a little unnecessary, or an LC2. You know, we're running a 68K40 at 33 megahertz, so that's not terrible. But you know, it runs pretty comfortably. But yeah, I've run this on machines as old as an original Macintosh Classic, and I mean, it's slow, but it does function. The key is you want to have, you know, a decent amount of RAM. You know, you don't want 5 megs. You want 8 at least. But the Classic 2 I think tops out at 4, so that's kind of a downer. Anyway, That's it for now. And it's hard to believe that just a few hours ago, in theory, this machine was ready to be ground into plastic pellets and glass and metal, where it would have never seen the light of day again. If I had shown up half an hour later, it wouldn't be there for me. And if it had been stacked anywhere below any television sets when it was on that pallet, there is no way in hell they would have let me take it. I would have had to have kind of walked away and let it go. Sad but true. It's not my first LC Performa 500 series. I've had at least two before in the past. Back when they weren't worth anything, I had a Performa 575 given to me. Same identical machine as this one, by its original owner, my aunt. And this was back in 2000 or 2001, right around the time she got married to my uncle. And that machine was in mint condition. I had everything it came with. I had the original keyboard, printer, mouse, manuals, discs. But sadly, it didn't make my first move. When I left my parents' house and a couple years later, actually no, that was the one I upgraded with a Performa 6300 logic board, and the upgrade didn't quite go as smoothly as I had hoped. But again, around that time I had gotten another one, and then that one was in perfect condition, and it didn't make the move because I didn't have room for it in my new apartment back when I left my parents' house. And at the time, these weren't considered classical Macs. They weren't considered collectible in any way, shape, or form. So I kind of had to let it go. It had to go. It wasn't worth anything. Nobody wanted it. But 20 years later, here we are. They're collectible now, and I was able to at least save one more unit. On to bigger and better things. I have a Macintosh Classic that I'm working on trading some old laptop for, and I'll have one of those again. And maybe I'll do a video on how to recap one of those logic boards. It's been a project that I've been wanting to tackle for quite some time. I think I mentioned it earlier in this video, but biggest problem with these older Macs is now the logic board caps are starting to go. And they're easy to replace, but they do cause major problems if they fail. Onward and upward, guys. Thank you for watching.